During the first year of this 7 years of bad, the drought in Egypt was just as devastating to them as any place else in the world. They weren't protected from the wind. They were not protected from the heat or from the catastrophe. But they did have a leg up on the preparations for survival. And so about midway through that first year, now Joseph had told the people, says, you know, all of the grain and the public lands is going to come into Pharaoh's storehouses. But on your own personal land, then we want you to harvest your own crops and to set aside 20% for emergency purposes and for the calamity that's going to come, which is what they did do. And so what Joseph did with the public lands and the harvest from it is that they collected it all, and then he set aside 20% into an emergency type fund to just in case everything falls apart, and we still have 20%. He told the people to do the same thing. Said, make your harvest and live on that harvest, but set aside 20%, and then in case for the time of bad. Well, they did that, but unfortunately what they did, within midway or 3/4 of the way through the first year, these people had, the residents had not only eaten their crops, but they had eaten the 20% they set aside. And so it was a situation that Joseph was not necessarily prepared for, but seemingly it didn't surprise him that it happened. And so these folks came to Joseph, and Joseph opened up the storehouses, and he did not give them the grain, he sold it to them. And so we don't know what the price of the grain or the food was for the Egyptians, but it was something that Joseph demanded, which they didn't argue with. You can do a whole lot of things when you're hungry. And this is what happened. By the second year of the drought, all private money in Egypt was the property of Pharaoh. There was no bank accounts for the private citizens. There was no hidden money, because they used their own private money to buy grain and to buy food. And for the Egyptians, not only grain, but also the perishable foods, water, and everything that had been stored during this time of catastrophe. And the historians tell us that tens of thousands of people died in that first year, even more so than even more than the ones that died in year number 5, 6, or 7. That first year was the major catastrophe. And Egyptian history tells us that the grave diggers, or the people that were in charge of burying the dead, they worked 24 hours a day just to bury the dead. Now in Egypt, they bury on top of the ground. If any of you ever been to Louisiana, you've seen the vaults that they used to bury on top of the ground. And they do that in Egypt even today. And so there were so many dead in the public lands that they actually had to begin to bury them under the ground. And so it was a catastrophic situation where you had thousands and thousands and thousands of dead people. Hundreds of them die every day very similar to the bubonic plague that hit Europe in the 14th century. And so people, these grave diggers and people who buried the dead, they were working around the clock. They couldn't keep up with it. Now, initially, Joseph had commanded these people to take care of the dead to actually go into that region that is now the Sahara Desert and to collect the dead, to give them a decent burial, so to speak. But there was just too many. It was beyond what the people could keep up with, beyond what Joseph could keep up with. By the time the second year closed, people were desperate to get out of this situation. But there was no way out. There was no place to go. There was no place to get any type of relief. Now, the people still needed the grain. They still needed the food by the close of the second year, the beginning of the third. But they didn't have any money. So Joseph said, okay, you see this in Genesis 47, if you want to read that, Genesis 47, 16 and 17. Joseph said, okay, you don't have any money, but what I'll do, I'll take your cattle, your horses, your oxen, I'll take all of your animals in lieu of money, and I'll give you the food that you need. So by the close of the third year, Pharaoh not only owned all the private money in all of Egypt, but he also owned all of the cattle, all the draft animals, everything that they had. By the beginning of the fourth year, they didn't have any more animals, but they were still hungry. So Joseph said, okay, and what I'll do is that I will give you grain, I'll give you food, I'll give you water, but you sign over your property to me. So by the end of the fourth year, there was no more private ownership of land in the country of Egypt. All of it had been signed over to Pharaoh. The only land that was not subject to this was the religious lands and those that was owned by the priests. Those were immune, but Joseph now demanded the money, all that you own, and your property. They did it because they were starving to death. Joseph did relieve some of the agony by moving people into cities. And so of the 3 or 4 million that were left, he moved them into the various cities throughout Egypt. And primarily the cities in the north, around the Delta region, and along the coast of the Red Sea on both sides is where most of the cities that were populated with people were. And it was a lifesaver for them. They couldn't survive out away from the cities, but in the cities they could concentrate more upon keeping people alive. And so this is what Joseph did. And you can read that in Genesis 47, 13 through 26 about that. And he put them to work. And you remember the windbreaks that I talked about last week. And behind those windbreaks, they actually planted harvest. And it was the first time in the history of mankind that irrigation was used. And Joseph invented this system of irrigation. And he put these people to work planting, harvesting behind the safety of the windbreaks. and it worked. They did harvest enough to replenish their own private supply, so that the government supply wasn't depleted so much. And so they, with this harvest that they had behind the windbreaks, they were able to replenish their private ones and some of what the government had already put out. And it was a real lifesaver to them, to the ones that were involved with it. But the bottom line is that the harvest that they had behind the windbreaks equal to only about 20 to 25% of replenishment. And so they still had a lot that was going out. Now, Pharaoh had, the Pharaoh that was Pharaoh at the time of the 7 years of good, he died in the third year. And so between his death and the new Pharaoh who came, Amenhotep, which came on the third year of the drought. So for that 6 year period, Joseph is the one who made the decisions that Pharaoh would normally make. And Joseph is one that really expanded the coffers of Pharaoh's bank account, so to speak. And finally, the new Pharaoh did come on the throne. And when he came on the throne as Pharaoh, the drought had been going on for 3 years. And so he gave, and Joseph had given permission for the former colonies, Midian, Arabia, Canaan, that they could come and buy grain, not any of the other food supplies, and not water, but grain. But then when the new Pharaoh came in the third year, then he opened it up for all countries that were affected by the drought, and so all of them could come to get the grain, but for a price. And the price was pretty heavy. These people, regardless of the country or the group of people or the civilization that came, they had to come with their wealth in hand to buy the food. And that was, we don't know whether that was Joseph's decision or Pharaoh's decision, but Joseph is the one that enforced it. And this is what these people brought. Babylon, Persia, Akkad, Media, whatever, whoever. If they came to Egypt to buy grain, they had to bring with them something to pay for it. Now that includes signing over all of their national treasures, their national bank accounts, their national assets, private properties, in fact, all property, private and public, fortifications, military installations, estates, castles, trade agreements, minerals, metals, mining enterprises, it doesn't matter. Anything that country had, Egypt demanded it as payment for the grain. At the end of that 7 years, well, at the beginning of the 7 years, Egypt had 15% of the world's wealth. And it also controlled 8% of the land in the world. At the end, Egypt had 96% of the world's wealth. It also controlled 75% of the land area of the world. But they still had another 20 or 25%, even at the end, when things were over, that they could rely upon for emergencies until we get back on our feet type thing. You know, I had an interesting opportunity here a few years ago, is that tourists are not allowed to go down into the Sphinx on the Giza Plateau, and you're not allowed to go down there. Used to you could, but not anymore. But I was taken not only down, a very dear friend of mine. We were not only went into the Sphinx, but we went into the tunnels that were underneath. There's tunnels that connect the Sphinx with the second and the third pyramids of the Giza Plateau of Mekere and Khafra. And in those tunnels, they have little little niches in the side of the walls of the stone walls. And what those were for is to store the foreign money, metals, or even documents that indicated that they had signed over a certain amount of land over to them, and they kept them in these little niches so that there would be enough time to have these things blessed by the priests of Ra. And there was so much that was in there that the priests were at least 3 or 4 years behind in blessing these foreign money and that type of thing, and it couldn't be put into circulation unless it was blessed by the priests. So consequently, there were hundreds of these little things in the walls, and some of them were larger than others, and that's where all that stuff was kept. And it was quite amazing, quite fascinating that of the mindset of Joseph and how he was able to prepare for and figure out everything. Every step was intricate, and every step was necessary, and he did it with masterful precision. It was wonderful. And Egypt not only survived, but like I said, they had about 25% left over that they could start all over again. Now, an amazing thing, too, that happened is that because of this windstorm, it blew the sand and a lot of the earth away from the bedrocks, especially in the Sinai and other places. And the soil was just removed. And what it exposed the minerals that were underneath. And so 1 year after the drought ended, Egypt was in the process of mining a tremendous amount of turquoise, silver, gold, platinum, and on of they mined more in the aftermath than they did in the 3,000 years before, because the wind had exposed all of this stuff. And they're still mining the Sinai today. And things that were caused during this tremendous upheaval. And they're still mining turquoise out in the Sinai desert from this catastrophe. And it was quite phenomenal. And they during that time, not only did they get rich from all these other countries that were bringing their assets and treasures in, but they also started padding their own pocketbooks with their own riches and their own wealth that was basically uncovered during this time of bad. It was during the first year that Joseph's brothers were sent by Jacob into Egypt. They had heard that, as this is Genesis 42, they had heard that there's grain, there's bread in Egypt, and they didn't have any in Canaan. And so Canaan was one of those colonies that was given the opportunity to come to Egypt and to buy grain. Now, you remember when Jacob and Esau, Jacob was up with Uncle Laban for a while, and he was working for him, got 2 wives out of the deal, and a bunch of cows, and got very rich. But you remember when Jacob was coming back, that he had a confrontation that was not really confrontational with his brother Esau. You remember that? Well, Esau at that time, let me go back just a little bit. During that time, Ishmael was Pharaoh of Egypt, and Esau married a daughter of Ishmael, and as a kind of a wedding present, Ishmael gave the land, the general area of what became Edom, what is now Jordan, to Esau. And so Esau became the king of Edom. And so he was a very, very powerful man. And the fact that he was married the daughter of Ishmael made him an heir even to the throne of Egypt, or down the line, heir to the throne of Egypt. But the Egyptian history, as well as Jordanian history, and they have a very at the National Library of Amman in Jordan, they have a whole section on the rule of Esau as their king, and that whole area, that whole time period. And it's very, very fascinating. And one of the things that they mention in there, now, the Bible doesn't say anything about this. Okay, so this is strictly from the history of Jordan. They say that when Esau met Jacob, Jacob felt that he was going to die. He was going to be killed by Esau, because Esau hated him at one time.
Welcome to Cubit Farm. Welcome.
I'm standing in the midst of God's Widow's Farm, which is actually a local phenomenon around here. And what you're seeing are the grapes that come from this farm. Before God gave us this acreage, originally 6 acres, now 10 acres, this plot of land was producing about 1 ton of produce or grapes or whatever it was producing, about 1 ton an acre.
But what has made this so phenomenal is that we're now averaging between 9 and 10 tons an acre on whatever is planted. Now, you see the grapes here, but we also raise eggplant, both black and yellow eggplant. There's corn, okra, squash. We have tomatoes, apricots, mangoes. And with the onions and grapes and onions and garlic and leeks, and it's just phenomenal. And what we do, we produce this, and the widows get the first crops, and we satisfy their needs first. And then once the widows are satisfied with the fresh produce, then we sell it, the remainder. And with the money that we get from the produce that we sell at market, then we can buy them blankets and shoes and school supplies and clothes and things like that they need. And if they need to go to the doctor, then we can pay for their doctor's visit, dentist visits, and so forth. And so this God's Widow's Farm produces all of that. We're supporting about 1,200 widows a month, plus their children, and it's just absolutely phenomenal what God is doing here, and it's actually beyond belief the type of produce that comes off of this farm, and it's just, and there's no chemicals, no preservatives that goes into anything. It's just absolutely wonderful, and the taste is, again, phenomenal.
God's Widow's Farm is made possible by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. You can help today by visiting cubitfoundation.org and give your gift of hope today. Dr. Ron Charles has spent over 50 years researching and uncovering the truths about the life of Jesus and information that proves the historical authenticity of the Bible. Gleaned from his years of tireless work, research, ministry, and archaeological work, and watch the pages of the Bible come to life like never before. Go to cubitfoundation.org and place your order today. All proceeds go directly to Cubit Foundation's efforts around the world.